Cracks don't show at first, but I always know where to look.
Derek Abner knew something was wrong the moment he saw his name on the violation report. Not because of what it said, structural integrity failure, code violations, immediate halt to construction, but because of the date. The inspection had been scheduled for Thursday. Today was Tuesday. He stood in the morning drizzle outside the Whitmore Historical Society building, watching his crew pack up equipment they'd been using for 3 months. The limestone restoration project was supposed to be his breakthrough, the kind of job that would establish his masonry business as more than just another contractor fixing suburban driveways. Sorry, Derek. Jim Kowalski, his foreman, shook his head as he loaded the pneumatic chisels into the truck. City says we can't touch nothing until this gets sorted. Derek stared at the yellow tape stretched across the entrance. Alec Faulkner's signature was scrawled at the bottom of the violation notice, along with a stamp that made everything official. Building Inspector, City of Millbrook. The same Alec Faulkner who'd been pushing the city to fast-track the Heritage Museum project that Derek had also bid on. Jim, when did you last see Inspector Faulkner on site? Faulkner? Jim scratched his gray beard. He ain't been here since we started. That's why this is so weird. Derek folded the violation report and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He'd been restoring old buildings for 15 years. He knew his work. More importantly, he knew when someone was lying about it. The drive home took 12 minutes through Millbrook's tree-lined streets. Derek had grown up here, married here, raised his son Nathan here. He knew every pothole, every stop sign, every family that had lived in the same house for generations. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, except apparently his own. Lily was in the kitchen when he walked in, her laptop open on the counter beside a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She worked for the Millbrook Heritage Foundation, managing grant applications and community outreach. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the severe bun she wore to board meetings, and she was typing with the focused intensity she reserved for important emails. Home early, she said without looking up. Project got shut down. That got her attention. She glanced at him over her laptop screen, green eyes sharp with concern. The Historical Society job? What happened? Derek pulled out the violation report and set it on the counter. Lily picked it up, scanning the official language with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with bureaucracy daily. This doesn't make sense, she said after a moment. Your work is always perfect. Remember the Brennan House Foundation? The city used that as a model project. That's what I thought, too. Lily closed her laptop. Who signed off on this? Alec Faulkner. Something flickered across her face, too quick to read, but there long enough for Derek to notice. In 15 years of marriage, he'd learned to read her expressions like a mason reads stone. There were visible cracks, and there were stress fractures that only showed under pressure. I know Alec, she said. He's on the Heritage Committee. Good guy. Very thorough. If he found violations, there must be a reason. Derek nodded, but he was thinking about the date on the report, about Jim's certainty that Faulkner hadn't been on site, about the way Lily's voice had changed when she said Alec's name. Warmer, more familiar than it should have been for a committee acquaintance. I'll call him tomorrow, Derek said. Get this sorted out. Lily reopened her laptop. That's a good idea. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. But Derek was already moving beyond misunderstanding. He was thinking about the museum project, about the city contracts that had been flowing through channels he didn't have access to, about the way Lily had been working late more often, taking calls in the other room, mentioning Alec's name with increasing frequency over the past few months. That evening, Derek sat in his workshop behind the house, surrounded by the tools of his trade. Chisels, hammers, levels, and measuring devices that could detect irregularities in stone down to fractions of an inch. Precision instruments for a profession that demanded perfection. He opened his laptop and began searching city records. Millbrook's municipal database was public, accessible to anyone who knew how to navigate the labyrinth of permit applications, inspection reports, and contractor registrations. Derek had learned to use the system during his early years in business, when he couldn't afford to hire someone else to handle the paperwork. The violation report was already in the system, dated 2 days ago. But when Derek cross-referenced it with the inspection schedule, he found something interesting. Alec Faulkner had been scheduled to inspect the Riverside Elementary renovation on Tuesday, the same day Derek's violation was supposedly filed. The elementary school was 45 minutes across town. Even if Faulkner had somehow managed to inspect both sites, the timing was impossibly tight. Derek dug deeper. Permit applications, contractor certifications, inspection histories. He found the museum project file and studied the timeline. The Heritage Foundation had submitted its initial application 6 months ago. The contractor selection process was supposed to be open bidding, but the recommendations had been fast-tracked through committee approval. 3 companies had submitted bids. Derek's was the lowest by $8,000, but the job had gone to Millbrook Restoration, a company Derek had never heard of. He searched the business registry and found that Millbrook Restoration had been incorporated 4 months ago. The registered address was a P.O. box. The listed contractor was someone named Thomas Brewer. Derek Googled Thomas Brewer. No website, no LinkedIn profile, no trace of previous work. For a contractor who just landed a $200,000 museum restoration project, Thomas Brewer had remarkably little online presence. But Derek found something else. In the permit application for the museum project, there was a secondary signature required for heritage compliance. The signature belonged to Lillian Abner, Heritage Foundation Program Manager, his wife. Derek stared at the screen for a long time. Lily hadn't mentioned signing off on the museum project. She'd never mentioned that Derek's bid had been rejected, even though she would have known about it through her work at the foundation. She'd never mentioned that someone named Thomas Brewer had underbid him, or that Alec Faulkner had recommended the alternative contractor. He closed the laptop and sat back in his chair. Outside, he could hear the television through the kitchen window. Lily was watching the evening news, probably preparing for tomorrow's board meeting. She did that sometimes, absorbed current events so she could make small talk with the foundation's donors. Derek picked up his phone and called David Yeh, a friend who'd retired from the city inspector's office the previous year. David answered on the 3rd ring. "Derek, what's going on? Heard you had some trouble today." Word travels fast. "Small town. Plus, I still have friends in the department. Alec Faulkner's been bragging about catching a major code violation. Says it's going to be a teaching case for other inspectors." Derek felt something cold settle in his stomach. Teaching case. Yeah, apparently your stonework was so bad it could have caused structural collapse. Alec's calling it a textbook example of contractor negligence. "David, you know my work. Have you ever seen me cut corners?" "Never. That's why I was surprised. Alec's got photos, documentation, the whole 9 yards, but between you and me, something feels off about this." "What do you mean?" David was quiet for a moment. "I've known Alec for 5 years. He's a good inspector, but he's also ambitious, always looking for the next promotion, the next opportunity. And lately, he's been spending a lot of time with the Heritage Foundation people. Networking, he calls it." "Networking. Derek, you didn't hear this from me, but Alec's been talking about starting his own consulting business. Heritage restoration compliance, working with nonprofits and historical societies. He's been very interested in the museum project." Derek thanked David and hung up. He sat in the workshop for another hour, thinking about timelines and signatures and the way Lily's face had changed when she heard Alec's name. He thought about Thomas Brewer, who didn't seem to exist, and about museum projects that got fast-tracked through committees. Most of all, he thought about the violation report in his pocket, with its impossible date and convenient timing. The next morning, Derek didn't call Alec Faulkner. Instead, he drove to the Millbrook Heritage Foundation offices downtown. The building was a converted Victorian mansion, all gingerbread trim and bay windows, the kind of structure Derek had restored dozens of times. He knew every architectural detail, every common structural weakness, every place where time and neglect could cause problems. The foundation occupied the entire 2nd floor. Derek had been there a few times for Lily's work events, fundraising dinners, volunteer appreciation gatherings, the occasional board meeting where spouses were invited. He knew the layout, knew which office belonged to his wife. But he didn't go to Lily's office. Instead, he walked to the reception desk and asked to see the museum project files. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said, "but those files are restricted to committee members and approved contractors." Derek showed her his business license. "I was one of the bidders. I'd like to review the selection criteria." "Oh." The receptionist, a young woman with carefully styled blonde hair, looked uncertain. "I think you'd need to speak with Mrs. Abner about that. She handles contractor relations." "Mrs. Abner is my wife. She suggested I come in and take a look." It was a small lie, but it worked. The receptionist led Derek to a conference room and brought him a thick folder marked Museum Restoration Project Confidential. She left him alone with the files. Derek spread the documents across the table. Bid submissions, evaluation criteria, committee meeting minutes, contractor certifications. He found his own bid package, meticulously prepared and submitted 3 weeks before the deadline. He found the evaluation matrix that ranked each contractor according to experience, cost, and timeline. According to the matrix, Derek's bid scored highest in all 3 categories, but there was an additional column marked Heritage Compliance Review that had been added after the initial evaluations. This column contained scores that dramatically lowered Derek's overall ranking. The Heritage Compliance Review was signed by Alec Faulkner, building inspector, and countersigned by Lillian Abner, Heritage Foundation program manager. Derek photographed every page with his phone, then replaced the files in their folder. He was walking toward the exit when he heard familiar voices from the break room. Told you it would work out. Derek never looks at the foundation paperwork anyway. I know, but I still feel terrible about it. He worked so hard on that bid. Derek recognized the second voice. It belonged to his wife. Hey, you can't think like that, the first voice said. This is business. Derek's a good contractor, but he doesn't understand the bigger picture. The museum project needs someone who can work with the heritage requirements, someone who understands the political aspects. Derek moved closer to the break room door. Through the gap, he could see Lily sitting at a small table across from Alec Faulkner. Alec was younger than Derek, maybe 35, with the kind of clean-cut appearance that looked good in campaign photos. He was leaning forward, his hand covering Lily's on the table. Besides, Alec continued, this is just the beginning. Once Thomas gets the museum project established, we can start working on the other heritage sites. The old courthouse, the train depot, maybe even the covered bridge. There's a lot of money in heritage restoration, especially with the federal grants coming online. Thomas is really okay with this arrangement? Lily asked. Thomas is fine. He gets a percentage for lending his name. We handle the actual work, everybody wins. And Derek never has to know about the corporate structure. Derek stepped back from the door. He'd heard enough. He walked quietly toward the exit, his mind processing what he'd learned. Thomas Brewer wasn't a contractor. He was a front. Alec Faulkner was running restoration projects through a shell company, using his position as building inspector to steer work away from legitimate contractors, and Lily was helping him do it. Derek drove home and went straight to his workshop. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, but instead of searching for more information about Alec and Lily, he began researching something else entirely: corporate law, shell companies, fraudulent contracting, the penalties for bid rigging and inspector corruption, the legal requirements for proving conspiracy and fraud, the procedures for filing complaints with the state attorney general's office. Derek had always been good with details. It was what made him a successful Mason. The ability to see patterns, to understand how small irregularities could compound into major structural problems. He'd spent 15 years learning to identify weakness in stone and mortar. It turned out that the same skills applied to identifying weakness in people. Over the next week, Derek began gathering evidence. He didn't confront Lily or Alec. He didn't demand explanations or make accusations. Instead, he documented everything. He found that Millbrook Restoration had been awarded 3 other city contracts in the past 4 months, all of them jobs that Derek had bid on, all of them jobs that had been fast-tracked through the approval process. He found that Thomas Brewer was actually a laid-off construction worker from 2 towns over, someone who'd been paid to lend his contractor's license to the shell company. He found that Alec Faulkner had been failing inspections for Derek's competitors at an unusually high rate, often for violations that were later rescinded after the contractors hired different engineering consultants. He found that Lily had been signing off on heritage compliance reviews for projects she'd never visited, relying entirely on Alec's assessments. Most importantly, he found that Alec Faulkner was in serious financial trouble. Credit card debt, a mortgage that was 3 months behind, a car loan that was headed for repossession. The kind of financial pressure that made people desperate, that made them willing to take risks they wouldn't normally consider. Derek began making copies of everything. He scanned documents, printed emails, saved web pages. He organized it all into folders on his laptop, cross-referenced by date and subject. He created a timeline showing the progression of the fraud, from Alec's first failed inspection of Derek's work to the most recent contract awarded to Millbrook Restoration. While he worked, life continued as normal. Lily went to her foundation meetings, Nathan prepared for his junior year of high school. Derek completed the smaller jobs that kept his business running. They had dinner together, watched television, discussed Nathan's college plans. On the surface, nothing had changed. But Derek was different. He was quieter, more observant. He listened carefully to Lily's phone conversations, paid attention to her schedule, noticed when she was late coming home from work. He began to see the small deceptions that had been invisible before. The way she avoided mentioning specific foundation projects, the way she changed the subject when Alex's name came up, the way she'd started working late on nights when Derek was out of town. One evening, Derek found Lily in the kitchen crying over her laptop. "What's wrong?" he asked. She wiped her eyes quickly. "Nothing, just work stress. The museum project is more complicated than we expected." Derek sat down beside her. "What kind of complications?" "Budget issues. The contractor is saying the restoration work is more extensive than originally estimated. We might need to find additional funding." Derek nodded sympathetically. "How much more?" 50,000, maybe 60. The foundation board is meeting tomorrow to discuss options." "That's a lot of money." "I know, and if we can't find it, we might have to scale back the project or find a different contractor." Derek put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." But Derek was thinking about the budget discrepancies he'd found in the Millbrook restoration contracts, about the inflated material costs and the labor charges that didn't match industry standards, about the way Alec and Lily had engineered the bidding process to exclude legitimate contractors who might have questioned the pricing. He was thinking about the fact that Lily had never mentioned the museum project's budget problems to him before, even though Derek had extensive experience with restoration cost overruns. He was thinking about the way she'd reacted when he'd first mentioned Alec's name, and about the conversation he'd overheard in the foundation break room. Most of all, he was thinking about the violation report that had started everything, and about the growing certainty that his marriage was built on the same kind of unstable foundation as a building with structural problems. 3 days later, Derek made his first move. He called the state attorney general's office and asked to speak with someone in the public corruption unit. He was transferred to a prosecutor named Jennifer Walsh, who listened carefully as Derek explained what he'd discovered. "This is serious," Walsh said when Derek finished. "Bid rigging, inspector corruption, fraudulent contracting. We're talking about multiple felonies. But I need to warn you, this kind of investigation takes time. Months, maybe longer, and it's going to get complicated, especially since your wife is involved." "I understand." "Are you prepared for that? For the possibility that your wife could face criminal charges?" Derek looked out his workshop window at the house where he'd lived for 12 years, where he'd raised his son, where he'd believed he was building a life with someone who shared his values. "Yes," he said, "I'm prepared." Walsh asked Derek to compile his evidence and submit it formally. She gave him specific guidelines for documentation, for preserving electronic records, for maintaining the chain of custody on physical evidence. Derek spent the next week preparing a comprehensive report, organizing everything he'd found into a coherent narrative of fraud and corruption. But he didn't submit it immediately. Instead, he began the second phase of his plan. Derek had learned that Alec Faulkner's financial problems were worse than he'd initially thought. The building inspector owed money to multiple credit card companies, was behind on his mortgage, and had recently taken out a high-interest personal loan. Derek began quietly buying Alec's debt. It wasn't difficult. Debt collectors were often willing to sell accounts receivable for pennies on the dollar, especially when the debtor was already in default. Derek created a limited liability company, hired a lawyer to handle the transactions, and began purchasing Alec's obligations through a series of shell purchases. Within 2 weeks, Derek owned nearly $80,000 of Alec Faulkner's debt. He also owned the right to pursue collection through legal channels, including asset seizure and wage garnishment. Derek's next step was to begin undermining Millbrook Restoration's ability to complete its contracts. He filed complaints with the state licensing board, questioning Thomas Brewer's qualifications and requesting reviews of the company's recent work. He submitted detailed critiques of Millbrook's restoration techniques to the Historical Preservation Society, pointing out methods that didn't meet modern standards. He also began documenting problems with Alec's inspection practices. Derek had friends throughout the construction industry, contractors who'd been dealing with Alec's increasingly erratic behavior. Derek encouraged them to file formal complaints, provided them with sample language for their submissions, helped them organize their documentation. Most importantly, Derek began laying groundwork for the financial destruction of everyone involved in the fraud. He researched the Heritage Foundation's funding sources and found that most of their grants came from federal agencies with strict anti-fraud provisions. A single substantiated corruption allegation could result in the loss of millions in federal funding. Derek began preparing a detailed complaint to the appropriate federal oversight agencies. He also discovered that Lily's position at the foundation made her personally liable for any fraudulent use of grant money. If she was found to have knowingly participated in bid rigging, she could be required to pay back every dollar that had been improperly awarded to Millbrook Restoration. Derek spent his evenings and weekends building his case, gathering evidence, preparing legal documents. He worked with the methodical patience of a craftsman, the same attention to detail he brought to restoration work. He was building something that would last, something that would stand up to scrutiny. And all the while, he said nothing to Lily. The first crack in their facade appeared on a Tuesday evening in late September. Derek was in his workshop when he heard Lily's voice through the kitchen window, sharp with anxiety. "I don't care what you promised him. We can't keep inflating the invoices. Someone's going to notice." Derek moved closer to the window. Lily was pacing in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. "Alec, listen to me. The foundation board is already asking questions about the cost overruns. If we push this any further, we're going to trigger an audit." Derek could hear the muffled sound of Alec's voice through the phone, but couldn't make out the words. "No, I am not being paranoid," Lily said. "I'm being realistic. We've already made enough money from this project. It's time to finish the work and move on." More muffled sounds from the phone. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, if we get caught, I'm not going down alone. You understand that, right?" Lily ended the call and stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the darkening yard. Derek could see her reflection in the window, could see the worry lines around her eyes, the way she was gripping the counter. He'd been married to this woman for 15 years. He'd seen her stressed about work before, seen her struggle with difficult foundation projects and demanding board members. But he'd never seen her look scared. Derek stepped back from the window and returned to his desk. He opened his laptop and began typing a new document, a comprehensive timeline of Lily and Alec's conversations, their meetings, their increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control of their fraud. He was documenting the collapse of their relationship in real time, watching their partnership dissolve under the pressure of their own corruption. And he was preparing to accelerate that collapse. The next morning, Derek drove to the city building department and requested a meeting with the department head, a woman named Carol Hendricks, who'd been in municipal government for 20 years. Derek had worked with Carol on several projects over the years and respected her professionalism. "I want to file a formal complaint about building inspector practices," Derek said. Carol's expression became serious. "What kind of practices?" Derek handed her a folder containing documentation of Alec's inconsistent inspections, his pattern of finding violations in Derek's work while approving questionable work from other contractors. He'd been careful to focus on the inspector misconduct without mentioning the broader fraud. That would come later, through the Attorney General's office. "This is concerning," Carol said after reviewing the documents. "I'll need to investigate these allegations. In the meantime, I'm reassigning all of your future inspections to other department staff." "I appreciate that, but I should mention that I'm also considering legal action. If I can prove that Inspector Faulkner's actions damaged my business, I'll be seeking compensation." Carol nodded. "That's your right. But I want you to know that we take these allegations seriously. If Alec has been engaging in misconduct, he'll face appropriate disciplinary action." Derek left the meeting knowing that Carol would begin her own investigation within days. He'd given her enough evidence to raise serious questions about Alec's conduct, but not enough to reveal the full scope of the fraud. That would come later, when Derek was ready to bring down the entire conspiracy. That evening, Derek's phone rang. The caller ID showed Alec Faulkner's number. "Derek, I understand you filed a complaint against me today." "That's right. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the Historical Society inspection, about the violation report. Maybe we should meet and discuss this." Derek was quiet for a moment. "What kind of discussion?" "I think we both want the same thing, to resolve the situation professionally, without involving lawyers or creating problems for anyone." "I'm listening. There's a coffee shop on Main Street next to the bookstore. Could you meet me there tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock? Derek agreed to the meeting, but he had no intention of resolving anything. Instead, he was planning to gather more evidence. He called David Ye and asked him to meet for coffee at the same shop, a few tables away from where Derek would be sitting with Alec. "I need a witness," Derek explained. "Someone who can testify about what's said." "Derek, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to let Alec incriminate himself." The next morning, Derek arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a table near the back, away from other customers but visible to David, who was sitting at the counter reading a newspaper. Alec arrived exactly on time, looking nervous and tired. "Thanks for meeting me," Alec said, sitting down across from Derek. "I wanted to clear the air about what happened." Derek didn't respond immediately. He studied Alec's face, noting the stress lines, the way he kept glancing around the coffee shop. "The violation report was a mistake," Alec continued. "I was working from old inspection notes and I confused your project with another site. The whole thing was just a clerical error." "A clerical error?" "Right, and I want to make it right. I'm prepared to withdraw the violation, issue a clean inspection report, whatever you need to get your project back on track." Derek leaned back in his chair. "That's interesting, because I've been doing some research and I found some other problems with your inspection practices." Alec's expression changed. "What kind of problems?" "Inconsistent standards. Violations that get rescinded after contractors hire different consultants. A pattern of failures that don't match the actual work quality." "Derek, I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts, and the facts suggest that you've been using your position to manipulate the contracting process." Alec was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more urgent. "Look, I know you're upset about losing the museum contract, but these things happen. Sometimes the best bid doesn't win. Sometimes there are other factors." "Like what factors?" "Political factors. Relationship factors. The Heritage Foundation wanted to work with someone who understood their vision." Derek felt a cold satisfaction. Alec was admitting that the bidding process had been manipulated, that legitimate factors like cost and experience had been overridden by political considerations. "And who helped them make that decision?" Alec's face flushed. "I provide technical expertise. When the foundation asks for my assessment of contractor qualifications, I give them my professional opinion." "Based on what?" "Based on my experience as a building inspector, based on my knowledge of heritage restoration requirements." Derek leaned forward. "Alec, I know about Millbrook Restoration. I know about Thomas Brewer. I know about the shell company and the inflated contracts." Alec's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know about your financial problems. I know about the debt, the mortgage, the personal loans. I know why you needed the money." "Derek, you need to be very careful about making accusations. They're not accusations, they're facts. And unless you want those facts to become public, you're going to help me fix this situation." Alec stared at him. "What do you want?" Derek smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "I want you to withdraw from the museum project. I want you to recommend that the contract be rebid through a legitimate process. And I want you to resign from your position as building inspector." "I can't do that. I have a family, a mortgage." "You should have thought of that before you decided to commit fraud." Alex stood up abruptly. "This conversation is over, and if you continue making these allegations, I'll have no choice but to take legal action." Derek remained seated. "That's your choice. But before you make any decisions, you should know that I've documented everything. Every contract, every inspection, every meeting. And I've shared that information with the appropriate authorities." Alex's face was red now, his hands shaking. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand the consequences." "I understand perfectly. The question is whether you understand." Alex stormed out of the coffee shop, leaving Derek alone with his coffee and his growing sense of satisfaction. David Ye walked over from the counter. "I heard most of that," David said. "Alex in deep trouble, isn't he? Deeper than he knows. And Lily? How much does she know about what you're doing?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "She's about to find out." That evening, Derek sat in his workshop and made a series of phone calls. First to Jennifer Walsh at the Attorney General's office to inform her that he was ready to submit his formal complaint. Then to the law firm he'd hired to handle the debt collection against Alec Faulkner. Finally, to a private investigator he'd contacted the previous week. "I need surveillance on 2 subjects," Derek told the investigator. "Alec Faulkner and my wife Lillian Abner. I want to know where they go, who they meet with, what they're planning." The investigator's name was Margaret Simmons, a former state police detective who specialized in financial crimes. She'd been recommended by Derek's lawyer, and she understood the delicate nature of the situation. "How long do you want the surveillance to continue?" she asked. "Until they make a mistake, until they do something that gives me the leverage I need to end this." Derek knew that Alec would contact Lily immediately after their coffee shop confrontation. He knew they would panic, would start making desperate decisions, and he knew that desperate people made the kinds of mistakes that could be used against them. He was right. The next morning, Derek's phone rang at 6:30. Lily's voice was sharp with anxiety. "Derek, I need to talk to you. It's about the foundation." "What about it?" "There's been a problem with the museum project. The contractor is saying he can't complete the work within budget. The board is considering legal action." Derek was quiet for a moment. Legal action against who? Against Millbrook Restoration? Against Thomas Brewer? Maybe against the Heritage Foundation itself if they think we didn't properly oversee the project? That sounds serious. It is serious, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Derek could hear the fear in his wife's voice, could hear her struggling to maintain control. He knew she was hoping he would offer to help, would use his construction expertise to find a solution. But Derek had moved beyond offering help. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, "but I'm sure you'll figure it out." Lily was quiet for a long moment. "Derek, is there something wrong? You've been different lately, distant." "I've been thinking about the business, about what I want to do next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm considering some changes. Maybe it's time to think about working outside Millbrook. Maybe it's time to look for opportunities in other markets." It was a lie, but Derek wanted to see how Lily would react to the possibility that he might leave town. If she was planning to continue her relationship with Alec, if she was planning to divorce Derek and marry her lover, then Derek's departure might actually be welcome news. "You're thinking about leaving?" Lily's voice was small. "I'm thinking about a lot of things." Derek ended the call and went to his workshop. He opened his laptop and began reviewing the evidence he'd compiled over the past month. Financial records, inspection reports, meeting minutes, recorded conversations. He had enough material to destroy Alec Faulkner's career and send him to prison. He had enough to ruin Lily's reputation and cost her job. But Derek wasn't satisfied with professional destruction. He wanted something more personal, more complete. He wanted to strip away every advantage they'd gained through their fraud, every benefit they'd enjoyed at his expense. He wanted to leave them with nothing. Margaret Simmons called that afternoon with her first surveillance report. Alec and Lily had met for lunch at a restaurant 2 towns over, somewhere they thought they wouldn't be recognized. They'd sat in a corner booth, leaning close together, speaking in urgent whispers. "They're scared," Margaret said. "Faulkner kept looking around the restaurant, checking to see if anyone was watching. Your wife was crying at one point." "Did you get photos?" "Clear shots of them together, yes." "But Derek, I have to ask, are you sure you want to proceed with this? Once you start down this path, there's no going back." Derek thought about the violation report that had started everything, about the months of deception, about the way Lily had looked at him when he'd mentioned Alec's name. He thought about the 15 years of marriage that had been built on lies, about the son who was about to learn that his parents' relationship was a fraud. "I'm sure," he said. That evening, Derek initiated the next phase of his plan. He called the debt collection agency and authorized them to begin formal proceedings against Alec Faulkner. He called the state licensing board and requested expedited review of his complaints against Millbrook Restoration. He called the federal oversight agencies and formally submitted his fraud allegations against the Heritage Foundation. Most importantly, he called Nathan's high school guidance counselor and scheduled a meeting to discuss his son's college applications. "I want to make sure Nathan has options," Derek told the counselor. "If he needs to leave Millbrook for college, I want him to have full financial support." Derek was preparing for the possibility that his family would be destroyed by the revelations to come. But he was also preparing to ensure that Nathan would survive the destruction, would have the resources to build a new life somewhere else. Because Derek knew that when his evidence became public, when the arrests began and the trial started, Millbrook would become a very difficult place for any member of the Abner family to live. 3 days later, Alec Faulkner received formal notice that his debts had been called in for immediate payment. The total amount was $83,000, payable within 30 days or subject to asset seizure and wage garnishment. Alec called Derek immediately. "This is insane," Alec said. "You can't just buy someone's debt and demand immediate payment." "Actually, I can. It's all perfectly legal." "Derek, I don't have $80,000. You know that. Then you'll need to find it. How? How am I supposed to find that kind of money? That's not my problem, but I have a suggestion. You could liquidate your assets, sell your house, your car, cash out your retirement accounts. Derek, please, we can work something out. I'll resign from the inspector position. I'll stay away from the Heritage Foundation projects. It's too late for that, Alec. You made your choices. Now you have to live with the consequences. Derek hung up the phone and immediately called Margaret Simmons. I need you to document everything Alec Faulkner does over the next week. Every meeting, every phone call, every desperate attempt to raise money. You think he'll do something illegal? I think he'll do something stupid. And when he does, I want evidence. Derek was right. Within 48 hours, Alec had approached Thomas Brewer with a proposal to accelerate the museum project billing, to submit fraudulent invoices for work that hadn't been completed. Brewer, terrified of being caught in a conspiracy he'd never fully understood, agreed to cooperate with law enforcement in exchange for immunity. The FBI arrested Alec Faulkner on a Tuesday morning at his home. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, bid rigging, and embezzlement of federal funds. Derek watched the arrest from his truck parked across the street, taking photos that he would save as personal mementos. Lily found out about the arrest when she arrived at work that morning. Derek's phone rang 20 minutes later. Derek, something terrible has happened. Alec's been arrested. The FBI is saying he was involved in some kind of fraud scheme. That's shocking, Derek said. What kind of fraud? I don't know. Something about the museum project, about false billing and corruption. Derek, they want to interview me. They're saying I might have been involved. Derek could hear the panic in his wife's voice, could hear her struggling to understand how her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Were you involved? Derek asked. Of course not. I mean, I signed some paperwork, approved some invoices, but I trusted Alec's professional judgment. I never imagined. Lily, you need to get a lawyer. A lawyer? Why would I need a lawyer if I didn't do anything wrong? Derek almost laughed. After months of planning her destruction, after weeks of gathering evidence of her corruption, Lily was still trying to maintain the fiction that she was innocent. Because the FBI doesn't arrest people for no reason, Derek said. And because if Alec was committing fraud, everyone who worked with him is going to be scrutinized. That afternoon, Derek received a call from Jennifer Walsh at the Attorney General's office. We're moving forward with the prosecution, Walsh said. Your evidence was instrumental in building the case. Faulkner is already trying to negotiate a plea deal. What kind of deal? He's offering to testify against other participants in the fraud, including your wife. Derek felt a surge of satisfaction. Alec was already betraying Lily, already sacrificing her to save himself. It was exactly what Derek had predicted would happen. What about the Heritage Foundation? Derek asked. They're going to lose their federal funding. The grants will be suspended pending investigation, and any money that was fraudulently used will have to be repaid. Your wife's employment will probably be terminated. And the criminal charges? That depends on how much cooperation we get from Faulkner. But based on the evidence you provided, I think we can make a strong case against your wife for conspiracy and fraud. Derek thanked Walsh and hung up. He sat in his workshop for a long time, thinking about the conversation he would need to have with Nathan. His son was 16, old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to be devastated by the revelation that his mother was a criminal. But Derek knew that the conversation was necessary. Nathan deserved to know the truth before he learned it from news reports or school gossip. That evening, Derek found Nathan in his room working on homework. I need to talk to you about something important, Derek said. Nathan looked up from his textbook. Is this about Mom? She's been crying all day. Derek sat down on Nathan's bed. Nathan, your mother is in trouble. Serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Derek explained the fraud scheme, the false billing, the corruption at the Heritage Foundation. He tried to use simple language, tried to help Nathan understand without overwhelming him with details. Nathan was quiet for a long time after Derek finished. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and confused. Did you know? Before this happened, did you know what Mom was doing? Derek considered lying, considered protecting Nathan from the knowledge that his father had orchestrated his mother's destruction. But Nathan deserved honesty. I suspected something was wrong. I investigated and I found evidence of the fraud. And you turned her in? I reported the fraud to the authorities. It was the right thing to do. Nathan stared at his textbook. Are you and Mom getting divorced? I don't know yet. That depends on what happens next. Where will I live? Derek reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. You'll live with me. And whatever happens, I'll make sure you're taken care of. College, everything we've planned, none of that changes. Nathan nodded, but Derek could see the pain in his eyes, could see his son struggling to process the collapse of his family. Dad, do you hate her? Derek thought about the question for a long time. Did he hate Lily? Or was it something more complicated than hatred? Disappointment? Betrayal? The death of love? I don't hate her, Derek said finally. But I can't forgive what she did, and I can't pretend it didn't happen. The next morning, Lily didn't go to work. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, staring at her phone. Derek found her there when he came in from his workshop. They fired me, she said without looking up. The foundation board voted to terminate my employment immediately. Derek poured himself a cup of coffee. I'm sorry. Are you? Are you really sorry? Derek turned to look at his wife. She was still beautiful, even with her red-rimmed eyes and her hair hanging loose around her shoulders, but she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her situation. I'm sorry this happened, Derek said. I'm sorry you made the choices that led to this. You don't understand. Alex said it was just business, just a way to streamline the contracting process. He said nobody would get hurt. But people did get hurt. Other contractors lost work. The foundation lost credibility. Federal funds were stolen. Lily looked at him with something like surprise. You really believe that, don't you? You really think what we did was that serious? Derek set down his coffee cup. Lily, you committed fraud. You stole money from the federal government. You destroyed my business reputation to cover up your crimes. Your business reputation? Lily's voice was rising. Derek, you're a small-town stonemason. You fix chimneys and patch foundations. This was about something bigger, something that could have helped the whole community. Derek stared at his wife, amazed by her ability to rationalize what she'd done. Even now, even facing criminal charges and financial ruin, she was still trying to convince herself that her crimes had been justified. You're right, Derek said quietly. I am a small-town stonemason. I fix things that are broken, and that's exactly what I'm doing now. The FBI interviewed Lily 3 days later. Derek wasn't present for the interview, but he heard about it from Jennifer Walsh. She's maintaining her innocence, Walsh said. Claimed she was just following Faulkner's technical recommendations, that she never understood the fraudulent nature of the scheme. Do you believe her? It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what I can prove, and thanks to your evidence, I can prove that she knowingly participated in bid rigging and false billing. Derek learned that Lily had hired an expensive criminal defense attorney, a lawyer from the state capitol who specialized in white-collar crime. The legal fees would probably exhaust their joint savings account. But Derek didn't care. He'd already moved his personal money to separate accounts. He'd also begun divorce proceedings. The papers were filed quietly, without fanfare, through a lawyer who understood the complex financial aspects of the case. Derek was seeking dissolution of the marriage on grounds of fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Under state law, Lily's criminal activities constituted grounds for forfeiture of her claim to joint marital assets. Derek would keep the house, the business, and the majority of their savings. Lily would be left with her legal bills and whatever remained of her retirement account. 2 weeks after Alex's arrest, Derek received an unexpected visitor. Kara Faulkner, Alex's wife, knocked on his door on a Saturday morning. I wanted to thank you, she said when Derek answered. Derek invited her in, curious about what Alex's wife had to say. Thank me for what? For exposing what my husband was doing. I knew something was wrong, knew he was involved in something he shouldn't be, but I never had proof. Kara was younger than Derek had expected, maybe 35, with short blonde hair and tired eyes. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. How long did you know? Derek asked. Months, the expensive dinners, the new clothes, the way he was suddenly so confident about money. Alec was never good with finances, but suddenly he was talking about buying a bigger house, taking vacations we couldn't afford. Did you know about Lily? Kara's face hardened. I suspected. He was working late too often, taking too many phone calls in the other room. When I asked him about the Heritage Foundation projects, he got defensive. Derek offered Kara coffee, and they sat in his kitchen talking about their respective spouses, about the signs they'd missed or ignored, about the betrayals that had destroyed their marriages. "What will you do now?" Derek asked. "Divorce him. Try to protect what's left of our assets before the government seizes everything. Maybe move back to my parents' house until I can get back on my feet." "I'm sorry this happened to you." Kara smiled sadly. I'm sorry it happened this way, but I'm not sorry it's over. I've been living with a stranger for months, wondering when the other shoe would drop." After Kara left, Derek thought about her words. He'd been living with a stranger too, but unlike Kara, he'd known exactly when the other shoe would drop because he'd been the one planning to drop it. The next phase of Derek's plan began the following Monday. He'd been quietly building a new contracting business, registered under a different name, with a clean reputation and no connection to the Millbrook scandal. He'd been networking with contractors in neighboring towns, establishing relationships with suppliers, laying groundwork for a fresh start. But Derek wasn't planning to leave Millbrook. Instead, he was planning to dominate it. With Alec Faulkner gone and the Heritage Foundation in chaos, there would be a vacuum in the local restoration market. Several major projects would need to be rebid, including the museum work that had started everything. Derek intended to win those contracts, but this time through legitimate channels. He submitted a formal proposal to the city council to serve as interim heritage restoration consultant while the foundation reorganized. He offered to complete the museum project at cost, with full transparency and oversight. He proposed establishing new bidding procedures that would prevent future corruption. The city council, desperate to salvage the heritage program and restore public confidence, accepted Derek's proposal unanimously. Derek began work on the museum project the following week. He hired back his original crew, brought in additional specialists, and implemented the restoration plan he'd originally proposed months earlier. The work proceeded smoothly, efficiently, without the cost overruns and delays that had plagued Alec's fraudulent version. Local media covered the project extensively, portraying Derek as the honest contractor who'd exposed corruption and saved the community's heritage program. Derek gave interviews carefully, speaking about the importance of integrity in public contracting, about the need for transparency and accountability. He never mentioned Lily by name, never discussed their marriage or his personal motivations, but everyone in Millbrook knew the story, knew that Derek had turned in his own wife to stop the fraud. Some people thought he was a hero, others thought he was a traitor. Derek didn't care about either opinion. He cared about results. Lily's criminal trial began in January. Derek attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching as prosecutors methodically presented the evidence he'd gathered. Financial records, recorded conversations, inspection reports, email communications, everything Derek had compiled over months of careful investigation. Alec Faulkner testified against Lily as part of his plea agreement. He described their relationship in clinical terms, focusing on the business aspects of their conspiracy while downplaying the personal elements. But Derek could see the truth in the prosecutor's questions, in the way Alec avoided looking at Lily when he described their private meetings. Lily's defense attorney tried to portray her as a naive victim, someone who'd been manipulated by a more experienced criminal, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Lily was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $140,000, her share of the fraudulently obtained federal funds. Derek watched from the gallery as his wife was led away in handcuffs. Lily looked back at him once, her eyes full of an emotion he couldn't identify, anger, sadness, maybe even a kind of respect for what he'd accomplished. Nathan was not in the courtroom. Derek had sent his son to stay with relatives during the trial, protecting him from the media attention and the painful details of his mother's crimes. After the sentencing, Derek walked out of the courthouse into the cold January air. Reporters tried to ask him questions, but he ignored them, walking to his truck in silence. Jennifer Walsh caught up with him in the parking lot. "It's over," she said. "You should feel proud of what you accomplished." Derek looked back at the courthouse, thinking about the past year, about the methodical destruction of his marriage and his wife's life. "I don't feel proud," he said. "I feel empty." "That's normal. This kind of thing takes a toll, even when you're doing the right thing." Derek nodded, but he wasn't sure that what he'd done was entirely right. It was necessary and it was just, But it had also been motivated by anger and betrayal. He'd destroyed Lily not just to stop her crimes, but to punish her for deceiving him. "What will you do now?" Walsh asked. Derek thought about the question. His business was thriving, his reputation restored. Nathan would graduate from high school in the spring and leave for college in the fall. Derek would be alone in the house where he'd lived for 12 years, surrounded by the remnants of a marriage that had been built on lies. "I'll keep working," Derek said. "There's always something that needs to be fixed." 6 months later, Derek completed the museum restoration project. The building was transformed, its limestone facade cleaned and repaired, its interior restored to its original grandeur. The Millbrook Heritage Museum opened to the public on a sunny Saturday in July, with a ceremony attended by the mayor, the city council, and most of the town's residents. Derek stood at the back of the crowd, watching as speakers praised the project's success and the integrity of the restoration process. No one mentioned Alec Faulkner or Lily Abner or the corruption that had nearly destroyed the entire heritage program. Derek preferred it that way. He wasn't interested in being remembered as the man who'd exposed his wife's crimes. He wanted to be remembered as the craftsman who'd saved the museum, who'd restored something beautiful and made it permanent. After the ceremony, Derek walked through the museum's galleries inspecting his work. The limestone walls were solid now, properly reinforced, built to last for generations. The foundation was level, the mortar joints clean and tight. It was good work, honest work, the kind of craftsmanship Derek took pride in. Margaret Simmons found him in the main gallery, studying a display case about Millbrook's architectural history. "You should be proud," she said. "This is beautiful work." "Thank you." "Any regrets about how everything turned out?" Derek considered the question. Lily was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility 2 hours away. She would be eligible for early release in 6 months, but she would never work in the nonprofit sector again, would never hold a position of trust or authority. Her life had been fundamentally altered by her choices and Derek's response to them. Alec Faulkner had received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but his career was over, his marriage destroyed, his reputation ruined. He was working as a night security guard at a shopping mall, struggling to pay child support and restitution. Nathan had thrived at college, studying engineering at a university 3 states away. He called Derek regularly, but he never asked about his mother, never mentioned visiting her in prison. The family Derek had tried to protect for 15 years no longer existed. "No regrets," Derek said finally. "People need to face the consequences of their choices." Margaret nodded. "And what about your choices? Any consequences you're still dealing with?" Derek walked to the museum's front window and looked out at the town square, at the community where he'd lived his entire adult life. Children were playing on the courthouse lawn while their parents chatted on park benches. Teenagers were walking toward the movie theater, laughing about something that seemed impossibly important to them. It was a peaceful scene, the kind of small-town tableau that appeared in travel brochures and Chamber of Commerce advertisements. But Derek knew the complexity beneath the surface, knew the rivalries and secrets and betrayals that simmered behind the peaceful facade. "I learned something about myself," Derek said. "I learned that I'm capable of things I never thought I could do. Good things or bad things." Derek was quiet for a moment. Necessary things. That evening, Derek drove home to the house he now owned completely, where he lived alone with his memories and his tools and his plans for the future. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the structure he'd maintained and improved over the years. The foundation was solid. The walls were straight. The roof didn't leak. It was a well-built house, constructed to withstand whatever storms might come. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from Nathan. "Saw the news story about the museum opening. Proud of you, Dad." Derek smiled and typed back, "Thanks. See you at Thanksgiving." As he walked toward the house, Derek noticed a crack in the front step, a hairline fracture in the concrete that hadn't been there the previous week. He made a mental note to repair it over the weekend, to prevent the crack from spreading and compromising the structural integrity of the step. It was what he did. He identified problems and fixed them. He built things to last, and when they failed, he made them strong again. Derek unlocked his front door and stepped inside, ready for whatever came next.